We were solving question number 10, which indicates whether each graph specifies a function y equals to f of x. We are given with the graph. We have to visualize it whether this graph represents a function. So if you are applying a vertical line test on this graph, the vertical line will be intersecting this graph at only one point. Since we can see that the graph represents a linear function, we already know that the linear function, this graph represents a function, but still we'll be applying a vertical line test. And when you are applying vertical line, and the line will be intersecting this graph at only one point. This is the graph of a function, and when you are passing a vertical line or you are drawing a vertical line, it will be intersecting this line at only one point. So this shows that it is a function. Vertical line intersects the graph at one point, so it is a function, or we can say each element of x-axis corresponds to one and only one element of the y-axis, so the given graph represents a function. Let's take its another part. Part B is, we are given with this graph. Now you have to check whether this graph represents a function or not. So if you are applying a vertical line, if you are passing a vertical line over here, here, or anywhere on this Cartesian plane, that vertical line will be intersecting this graph at only one point. If you are, for example, if you are drawing a vertical line here, it will be intersecting the graph at only this one single point. So this graph represents a function. Its solution is, vertical line intersects the graph at one point, so it is a function, or we can say each element of the x-axis corresponds to one and only one element of the y-axis. So the given graph, this graph represents a function. Let's check this graph. If you are drawing a vertical line here, this vertical line, or for example, we can take y-axis as our vertical line. This line will be intersecting the graph at this point, the second point, and here the third point. So vertical line will be intersecting this graph at 3 points. So we can say that this graph does not represent a function. Here is its solution. Vertical line intersects the graph at more than 1 point between -1 and 1. So it is not a function. At x equals to 0, the corresponding values of y are -2, 2.5, and 6, which does not represent a function. Or we can say which is not 1, 1, so the graph does not represent a function. Now let's move towards the next question, that is question number 11. Determine domain and range of the following. Now how will you be finding domain and range of the given functions? We are given with this function. Since we can insert any value of x to get the value of y, so its domain can be any real number. But for finding range, we have to separate this variable x from this function. Since the variable is not involved in the denominator of this fraction, so its range can also be any real number. Let's discuss this second part. Now how to find its domain, since you can insert any value of t to get the output y. So the domain of this function can be any real number. What about its range? So you can equate y as f of t. Then you have to separate this variable t. After separation, the value of t is plus minus under root y minus 5. Since y is involved under the radical, so you will be solving it for the values of y. Under certain condition, you have to apply some condition, that is y minus 5 greater than or equal to 0. Why? Because the condition is you won't be getting negative sign under the radical. So the values of y will be greater than or equal to 5. So when these values of y, when you are putting them in this function, you will be getting some defined answer. What if you are putting any value other than this interval? If you are taking the value of y less than 5, then you will be getting negative sign under the radical, which will be moving you towards the imaginary numbers. So you are restricted with the values of y which are greater than or equal to 5. So your range will be the function y, or your output, we can say the output of this function will be greater than or equal to 5. Then look at this third part, the surface area, that is 4 pi r square. Its domain will be set of real number, because when you are inserting any value of r, either you are inserting negative value, it will be giving your output as positive number. Why? Because of this square. When you are taking square of a negative number, your answer, your output will be a positive number. But what about its range? Again, apply the same steps. You have to separate this variable r. SA represents your output, or you can also write it as y equals to SA. SA represents the surface area. So when you are separating this variable r from this function, this is your answer, plus minus under root SA 4 pi. Now the condition is with SA, that is your output, or you can write it as y. So the values of SA or y will be equal to or greater than 0. As SA represents your range, that is the output, so the range of this function will be greater than or equal to 0. Here comes question number 12. Find the composite function g of f of x and f of g of x of the following functions. Look at this first part. You are given with two functions, f of x and g of x. Your first part will be to find g of f of x. You have to compose these two functions. Let's solve them. F of x is your first function and g of x is your second function. You have to compose g of f of x. Now look at this function. F of x is the input of this g function. Now what is f of x? F of x here is x square plus 1. So instead of f of x, we have replaced it with x square plus 1. Now look at this part, g of the input. X square plus 1 is the input of this g function. Now look at the g function. What is g function? It is 2x. Here its input was x, and now in this step the input is x square plus 1. So instead of x, we will replace it with x square plus 1, which is the required answer. What you have done, you have taken f of x as an input to this g function. Now let's find f of g of x. Now this g of x will become input to this f function. What is g of x? Look at this g of x function. It is equal to 2x. So what is f function? F function is x square plus 1. So instead of x, we will be replacing it with 2x. 2x square plus 1, which is the required answer. Look at this b part. Again, you have to compose it as g of f of x and then f of g of x. Let's solve it for g of f of x first. Now g of f of x. F of x becomes input to this g function. What is g function? G function is 1 minus x square. So its input is sine x. So instead of sine x, we'll be writing sine x square, because in the function it was 1 minus x square. After applying square, it will be sine square x. You know that the trigonometric identity says that sine square theta or cos square theta equals to 1. So when you are shifting cos square theta on the other hand side, it will be like 1 minus sine square theta. So you just have replaced it with cos square theta. Here the angle given is x. So it is cos square x. So you have composed g of f of x. let's compose f of g of x. Now g of x will become the input to this f function. Look at this f function. As its input, we will be inserting this g function, that is 1 minus x square. So f function is sine of x and g function is 1 minus x square. So instead of its input, which was x, we will be replacing it with 1 minus x square. So here we have composed f of g of x. Let's take C part. Let's compose g of f of t. F of t function f of t, which is equal to under root t, becomes the input to this g function. We are writing instead of f of t as under root t. And what is our g function? G function is equal to t square. So instead of t, we'll be inserting under root t whole square. So when you are applying square under on the radical, it will be cancelled out. You will be left with t. Now when you are composing f of g of t becomes input to this f function. What is g of t? G of t is equal to t square. So f function is under root t. So instead of t, you have replaced it with t square. So when you are taking off 2 with the radical sign, you will be left with t. Likewise, you can solve this t part. Solve it and compare your answer with the solution. Do this t part on your own and then compare it with my solution. Here is its e part. I want you to solve these parts on your own so that you can understand them very well. I'll be explaining you question number 13. Determine the inverse function of each of the following functions. We have solved this question before. This is the given function. You have to find its inverse. Your first step will be to replace this f of x function as f inverse of y. When you are shifting this f on the other hand side, it becomes f inverse of y. So replace it. I have solved this question in my second video for you in detail. In steps, I have divided this question in 4 steps. I want you to apply the same 4 steps. I'm providing you with the solution so that you can compare your answers only. We have already discussed and done this question number 13. I want you to do it properly. Mention the steps and apply the same steps every time so you can memorize them. Let's discuss this question number 14 now.